Scene/Chapter 5. Life seems fine but problems appear. It's bigger than we thought. Bob makes some interviews that show his past chance meeting has formed into some eerie reality. Bo's girlfriends are feeling an uncomfortable tension. Bob packs up his kit and leaves his apartment with his cameras and tablet loaded up to go and work deeper on the story with the interviews in the apartment building restaurant which he uses often. He says hello to the manager who takes him to the table he usually interviews people and sets his camera on a tripod and sits and waits for the first interview to arrive. After a while looking out the window and drinking coffee, the first female CEO he invites for lunch arrives. He is using his handheld camera on a table tripod to do the interviews at the table as well as a wide angle of them at the table from the tripod stand camera. This first CEO owns a PR and marketing company essentially for female products from shampoo through hairspray and lipstick to handbags and shoes and girly software products. They order lunch and Bob asks a few standard questions to get things going about company size etc., but she pushes her products rather than answer the questions. She avoids questions on biotech products, again changing the subject. For no apparent reason she behaves strangely, raises her arms and says she has gained some blessing from God to be where she is. Bob immediately asks her if she has any proof of this. She says that she is now a multi-millionaire. What other marketing proof do you need? Bob looks down and away with a sarcastic smile, making notes for when he performs some camera reverse pointing at him while he asks the same questions and give visual responses to her answers after she has left. This woman and her female assistant seem very close and the assistant supports her every statement with nods and positive noises. They have risen very quickly to a high position in the marketplace but appear to be a bit flaky on their history and where they came from and are not the usual rich man's daughter funding something to do, like PR, to support her exotic lunches and holidays. They two of them have that awful valley speak affliction, raising their voices at the end of sentences like some Australian backstreet ocker and use more key buzzwords than make sense with a large splattering if so, totally, you know, and other nonsense use of words. Bob notes on his tablet, oh totally so. After they leave, Bob says to camera as he does his reverses in valley speak, you, totally so really awful, you know, shaking his head from side to side as he says awful. As the waiter clears up the table, the second meeting with the CEO who owns an international advertising company arrives for coffee. This woman CEO's company again focuses on advertising female products. As they sit, Bob notices a similarity to the pair of tattoos to his girlfriend's either side of her belly button that is unintentionally displayed as her shirt parts as they get up and leave the cafe. The tops of the tattoos are also showing on the bare midriff of her assistant who is dressed casually. They too have a similar vague description of their history and their rise to a prominent position with their company being totally female-staffed. Bob notes tattoos on his tablet and scribbles a sketch outline of them. A third CEO arrives who has an international human resources talent recruitment, placement and headhunting company and has the same tattoo as do her two assistants. Bob notes more. It's like a bloody body inking convention. This team appear as a very close group specializing in putting women in top jobs but cover all levels of recruitment, even girl children for advertising. He sees them as hugely biased towards feminists and feminine male gaze, putting unqualified people in positions due to their bias in preference to sex and not ability. The CEO even makes statements that the percentages of women in top positions needs to rise whether they are qualified or not. She emphasizes that this is most important in the biotech arena. Bob notices her attraction to biotech was overly intense. She then tries to hide it. When Bob raises his eyes and says that there are more women involved with biological sciences than men, but mainly in the fashion, makeup and toiletries areas rather than anything socially useful. They all say they find these products useful and look at him as if he is an idiot. Bob scribbles chemistry laboratory bottle washers with a smiley on his tablet. Bob is not sexist, but this CEO is far over the top in her behavior. Bob makes reference to advertising on web videos and girls that have been trained from porn studios like the infamous LS Studios in Ukraine and its hundreds of 8/16 nudes. The CEO says actually it is over the 1,000 area, indicating she knows about it, and says she does not recruit for porn but seems unsettled by the subject. Bob says that there are many millionaires in that business and those girls are now qualified in presentation skills, indicating it was a school, and they have now moved into other areas. The woman glares at him for suggesting female usury but does not deny her involvement with what could be called women trafficking as expatriate or other foreign workers for factories or other duties generally housed in group hotels or hostels. They mention that all their foreign workers are usually paired up as twins. Bob says, "Do you mean identical strangers or sisters?" They correct themselves, probably while chuckling. The meeting ends with the women providing end-of-finger handshakes as if they don't want to touch him. A similar approach is taken in some rabid religious actions where they won't touch foreign or male hands, and those who do not know how to ignore it end up waving their arms around like retards. Meanwhile, as Bob does the reverse camera angles on these interviews, news stories of corporate and central system financial institution collapse and establishment indecision are appearing on news screens in the background of the cafe and in windows across the street. As Bob replays his clips, he notices these solemn faces on the TVs in his replays. Many serious and worried faces talking across tables with clenched fists, and stock market pundits and commentators sounding like they are presenters of a WWF wrestling match. Bob notes on his tablet that all these women hold positions that influence society directly and are not promoting positions that create productive goods. Although they are manipulating the consumer market to increase sales on what is already mostly saturated, they veer away from talking about transnational draconian female sweatshops and textile, clothing and shoes or other related electronics manufacturing for transport or ICT products. As they are based around PR, advertising and marketing, job finding, human resource recruitment, etc., all influencing people positions. He brackets out influence and replaces it with control slavery. The afternoon moves on and Bob's last interview appears. Arranged by a woman who called Bob to meet him in response to an approach made by his colleagues in the Skype call, a local CEO man involved with a transnational engineering group. As they collect items from the afternoon tea buffet, this CEO tells Bob that there are more and more women taking control of the labor market. It appears they are doing this either as direct CEO takeovers voted by the collection of women that they have accumulated around them in the workplace, or more so as corporate support staff who have declared unilateral independence, like some unsigned or ticketed managerial union of women or clandestine international sorority. He goes on to say that more women are appearing on building sites in Asia who have started controlling the concrete deployment and moved up into other controlling logistics. He says this is a good thing possible because the opportunities of these jobs are available to build the myriad of empty buildings that are appearing everywhere without a hope of them being filled with people. He complains that unfortunately, like most minority activist takeovers, the group is not accumulated by ability but by populist weight of numbers. It happens by the lobbying of policies that motivate individual selfishness, and those policies are similar to the policies the leaders are applying for themselves to gain self-centered top-level controlling positions. An upward spiral into the mists of the clouds without substance. Bob notes on his tablet that he puts his point badly by appearing that he is in fear of women taking his job, but the reality is that anyone can take his job. With the current population explosion, there are more candidates available, and he is targeting women with his 1950s schoolboy antique notions. The CEO then hits a good point which makes Bob make a big note, as he says the groups are appearing to siphon off the wealth of the corporations to a disparate group of stock holdings that keeps changing, so can't be pinned down to a core. He says it is very clever to set up a disparate group that a core cannot be pinpointed, just like the way the USA had no Centre colony in their evolution, so the British Navy had no centre to destroy, and how religious enclaves subversively take over societies with a core policy but dispersed without any fixed leadership to approach. Unlike the hierarchy of the Pope's followers, this is a belief-only led social guerrilla warfare which cannot be encircled and defeated. He looks lost and says the typing pool has spilled over and upwards. It is not surprising, since managers absorbed the typing jobs on their personal computers in their offices. Most traditional secretaries that were recruited from the typing pool were in more control of what was going in the business than the male office figurehead who they were supporting. Now the secretary is not just a typist and filing administrator, but they control the schedules of their bosses, who spend most of their time reading email and protecting their asses from being kicked. Bob says but that what he says is the method of all corporate governments worldwide. The CEO agrees but says this is a short-term attack over less than half a decade and growing from within, very aggressive and increasing rapidly. Bob says no difference then, it's just that women are taking over. The CEO answers that they are a small minority, restating that they are not based on ability as a general policy and appear to be guided from a central core that is nowhere to be found, apparently non-centralized, and appearing to promote the basic female selfishness of personal nest building and growing a family to support the mother but not the father. He says it seems to have grown from a typical socially unproductive government policy to provide unusually high benefits for unmarried mothers in some nations, promoting unproductive services and top-level elite theft. A matriarchy of selfishness prompted by men closing women out of managerial positions for so long. Bob notes that this man is showing an apparent dislike for women, but notes he does not seem the average chauvinist or misogynist, but has more understanding and behaves as if suffering from a kind of disorientated unease, as if he feels he is being attacked but did not know from where, and is blaming the increase in women being around him he has not had before. He is using a lot of hackneyed chauvinist arguments, and a CEO should know these things unless he is in a panic, but he should also be in control, and he isn't. However, he seems to be correct about the increase in women in controlling positions that he provides in some paperwork to Bob, who are indecisive and collecting equally indecisive men around them. He tells Bob he is used to making decisions and them being implemented, not the change that is happening, that his decisions are being referred to many levels of meetings where most of the group put the date at the top of their notepads and then talk about fashion or where they went or are going to go for lunch. Bob asks if it seems like the Bilderberg Group or Illuminati, except a similar female-coordinated sorority fraternal activist group. The CEO says it seems so, but it would be okay if it was acting for the public good, and it doesn't appear that it is, but as a delay tactic to keep jobs rolling rather than do anything to create revenue to pay them. Bob says just like the sucking dry of society by the top C-level so-called elite 1% considering their job is worth more than the rest of the team, then, after all, what public good does that provide by taking more than 100 times more than the skilled shop floor workers out of a production team, other than create gross demotivation? The CEO acknowledges Bob's argument as Bob says the capitalist trickle-down has become a social trickle-away which began in the mid-1970s Thatcherite era and now over half a century later losing all the social prosperity that was gained after World War II. However, the CEO says that women in general, the new majority, don't have a mathematical mind, having difficulties absorbing mathematical analysis and concepts, and so lacking logical reasoning, what they establish with over-emotion and anxiety. He says that having an engineering background, he knows mathematics requires detail and not holistic views. It provides infinite detail and requires putting the issues into boundary conditions and stepped solutions, knowing what to do and how much to do it. The mathematical series are infinite. It is practical engineering which provides a holistic boundary, or indeed female contextual overview, with a broad perspective remaining above the limits of minimum consequence. This methodology removes all iterations that are ineffectual within the boundary conditions of the context in which the engineering takes place. We know that when we let go of a pencil it falls to the floor, but when it gets there it bounces in different directions, showing us an example of the fractal mathematics that explain a performance that is sensitive to initial conditions. As the conditions around us are in continual change, we cannot go back and reproduce those conditions in condition-sensitive activities, and so have to limit our experiments to be within the repeatable actions in order to study them. Bob agrees that scientific model evidence supports the mathematical reason and his anxiety part, but the 8 main differences between male and female ways of thinking are important to understand. It is important that many men have female thought methods. This is shown up by Mulder in the X-Files, a man who thinks in female way and Scully, a female who thinks in a male way. First, women don't threaten by pulling together by force, assertive military activities on borders or by war, but hold things together by establishing holistic contextual perspectives in which participants can take part by their ability, generally shown in how they manage their children. This differs from the male focus on specific details that often miss taking all aspects into account. Mathematics finds solutions that work on specifics and are not usually generalizations, as the mathematical series which describe physical situations are stripped down to within the boundary conditions on which they apply. For example, the differing dedicated individual perspective boundary conditions of Newtonian, Einsteinian, quantum and string theories, which provide solutions within a context of a holistic unified solution of space, time, mass, charge and temperature, all can be cross-referenced, especially the collapse of the quantum wave function, as long as they remain within the effects of minimum consequence. Even if some as yet still have work to do in the realms of the new physics being studied and experimented upon at CERN, a set of solutions have been formulated. Second, even though women may appear to hold a selfish aspect of small family nesting instincts, to have a family support them, they are fulfilled long-term by their family. This differs from the short-term male instant satisfaction paradigm, which has no longevity and requires search for the next high. The economics foundation created by male economists of a utility based on a psychological illusion of satisfaction level, rather than a grounded empirical standard of measurable fulfillment. Is it full or empty? Women all have the base level nurturing motivated by a family being united for survival fulfillment, rather than the male view of its purpose as a family for short-term production. Third, women attain results by finding connections and relationships between what exists to create solutions, rather than the male method of collecting or having to create evidence, mathematical or otherwise, to support them in their required solution. Fourth, women look at the overview of the conditions creating a situation, or the ifs to create it, not like the male searching for its requirements or needs and mathematical solutions. Fifth, women assess conditions and manipulate leverage, allowing a balance to be achieved initially faster than the male way of breaking a situation down into individual issues. Breaking down a situation is only necessary to correct a catastrophic failure usually created by not having balanced contingencies to cover changes in conditions. Mathematics rigidly breaks things down into solution steps. Sixth, the female method creates more resilience by looking at a top-down view of a holistic why did it happen or is it needed, and when did it happen or will it be needed time scale, the motivations. The male bottom-up perspective of not stepping back to find the why purpose and looking at an immediate how do we do it or was it done, and with what have they got already. The male method misses priorities in the rush to be first, so their what can we do now misses, on most occasions, fundamental components of what is needed to meet the purpose and requirement conditions by creating unconditional requirements and ending up with projects that flap about near their launch completion date without any final goal being achieved. This ends up with a collection of fudged workarounds when the initial what and how plans are realized, at the end, that they cannot all be achieved as the important parts are missing because all the whats were not considered. The prime example was the luck of Apollo 13 that was brought back on chewing gum, toilet paper and string workarounds because they had not created contingencies for meteorite puncture, even though the space they flew through is filled with them. Seventh, Women analyze the motivations which appear as the why is it needed, and when, concerning a situation, requirement or direction to go, rather than the male method of looking at the purpose of what it will do and reasons for how to fulfill a need for immediate satisfaction or gratification. 8th. The female wide view of context gives a holistic outside-the-box solution setting in closed perspectives and priorities rather than the male focus on a few direct issues on the big picture inside the box. It is a well-known phrase that if you are no good at something, or sitting inside a closed box, you lack the very skills you need to know you are no good at it. The narrow male perspective that does not look outside their own context makes them unable to see their own faults and failures. Both methods of thought, however, are needed in various quantities in a team to suit a system of ordered priority of needs to suit a given contextual situation, where problems that occur are solved depending on what is best suited to the overall problem perspective within a given context boundary. It is the overall project management of risk mitigation, availability, prioritizing and application of optimizing algorithms that finds the most effective and efficient solutions. It seems that the female method of thought has a far-reaching position in the path of evolution with its holistic, long-term, non-confrontational, sustained fulfillment-driven approach, the big-picture path of nature, which is falling away as many women are behaving and being confrontational and aggressive like men due to an education system that has become focused on the economics of business growth rather than academic studies concerning the realistic balance of resources approach. Women have been forced to compete on the same field as men. Competition being a male-pulling process of domination shown by the behavior of non-thinking animals in the evolutionary tree, and, after all, it is futile to try and reason with blind aggression. It would be better if women took a step sideways and used their best abilities to create their own sustainable communities with the men who think the same way as they do. After all, with all the destruction we are seeing in the North Atlantic nations, of environment but mainly social, it seems that the dominant male way of thought, of physical animal strength rather than mental fitness, is killing them. It's not exactly a direction of elevated evolution, but they have a paradigm which is a crime against evolution. The planet is lucky to have the southern hemisphere, which is mainly ocean, and tropical rainforest which is inhospitable to them to keep them away. The local CEO ends by acknowledging Bob's comments and saying he feels he has little control as it has been slowly whittled away from him, decisions out of his hands on essential employment. Especially when it comes to any blonde, brunette or red-haired, well-dressed LBGT who may appear as a new employee, who has appeared from overseas or a nearby country, appointed by their head office human resources department. He goes on to say some of these MBAs are breaking up good business, and he makes comment about examples of a few hugely successful Japanese companies who have now failed in Europe due to this. Given important jobs by HR human remains departments because they have higher qualification in so-called business rather than in skilled subjects which have a useful strictly academic focus. He says to Bob, "You sound like Mulder in the X-Files." Bob does not know how to take this but responds, "I don't know if I would go that far, but I certainly am in touch with my feminine side to look holistically outside the box, and unfortunately there are a lot of scullies about, and smoking men." Bob emphasizes that the 8 comparisons are ways of sex-type thinking based on women and men's behavior, not necessarily embodied in men or women, and can appear in both. It appears that more and more women have now been educated to think like men, giving them a degree of internal confusion in what their education has taught them and the way they really feel, a psychological struggle between the internal nature versus nurture. It began post-World War II when women were trained to be just good housewives, which not an easy management job anyway, but then in the late years of the century boosted by feminist domination. Many men since the 1960s mind-expanding times, which was stomped on by increasingly authoritarian socially oppressing corporate governments, to have become in touch with themselves, realize the benefits of holistic context thinking before reverting to male detail-oriented perspectives as the eventual focused achievement process. The CEO says soon there will be a new area of LGBT who think in both ways and be more confused about themselves than they already show they are. After all, politics is rubbish with the old male way. We now need men like women running into the toilet crying when they don't get their own way after asking a question a million times as if that will change the answer. The CEO glugs down his wine and smiles. Bob notes fruitcake and desert wine talking, but a good few insightful statements now on video. Bob notices the CEO's attractive young female assistant taking copious notes on her tablet. When they finish, as she stands up, Bob gets a close glimpse of her stomach that she also has hip tattoos, as if she is showing him them like showing some fraternity ring to be wary about. Bob goes to their car with them and thanks them with the assistant driving and the CEO looking as if he has eaten too much in the back. Bob then returns and packs up his stuff and makes his way to the lift with it after chatting to the cafe manager. Back in Bob's suite, he dumps his stuff in a heap and goes and sits and has a beer with his girls. He asks about the tattoos that he has seen and that they look the same as theirs. He also asks about what look like keyhole surgery scars under them. They say they think that they all belong to a rainforest family. In some areas girls have scars on their cheeks as a beauty thing like piercings. They don't remember when they got them, so probably they were given by their family when they were very young. They say the scars they have mean they cannot have children. Bob says the tattoos look like they have been given after the scars, so how come the scars they got as children don't seem to have stretched or faded much? Both girls don't seem to know the location of where they came from very well, as it appears disguised by taboo. All they can say it was a coastal village somewhere in the south. They were told when they were young that their parents were killed when a tsunami destroyed their village when they were babies. Bob tries to get closer by asking more and more questions, and the girls become uncomfortable and appear worried about him. They ask him not to ask any more about them as it doesn't matter, as they are together now and the past is the past. So, he stops and they continue talking about what they are going to do at the weekend and have another cold beer and relax to some music. Later Bob goes to work at his desk uploading his video clips and reviewing the news while the girls watch TV. The chat show they are watching has the two women who were assistants to the power-dressed auntie and CEO on it. These women are using rational arguments in a chat show that oppose Bob's girlfriend's support for him, and the argument they are promoting is that it would be better if Asian women should all leave foreign men. They are being really forceful, like a pre-rehearsed double act, one setting up questions while the other answers so the presenter can't get a word in, a common method for dominating any meeting. The arguments on the chat show is that foreigners and locals are culturally incompatible and they alienate antiquated taboos ingrained in third world cultural eugenic family marriage beliefs. The arguments are contra to increasing biological diversification in favor of family cronyism controlled by the elder's choice. The presenter says their attitude unfortunately is still being used in religious enclaves in so-called developing countries. The attitudes of these two women seem staged rather than the kind of globalist integrated behavior of an advanced corporate status whose education should encourage reproduction of new elements rather than mix them and cause a homogeneous social mud. Also that social interbreeding causes the enhancement of degenerative genes, as they are the least common denominator at the bottom of a potential well of alternatives. Bob notes that localism is required to preserve diversity, but what these women are saying is excessive and outrageous as an attitude that is very protective of their own position but shows a protective conservative opinion towards those they leech off to gain their favor, but it is typically false. Bob's girlfriends sit and look at their tattoos. They cannot have children and it is an emotional pressure on them. They have often talked about leaving him, and that will support Bob by helping him find a better future in the long term. That kind of talk made Bob very unhappy, as he would be lost without them. They communicate to each other by glances as they sit on the bed and watch TV. The girls go out and come back with a big spread of delicious food and beer, and they eat together and have a wonderful night having fun at the table and go to bed laughing and giggling.